The first panelist I want to introduce is Teresa Whitney. Hi, Teresa. Teresa is the Vice President of Marketing and Merchandising at Albertsons Companies. She has a long history in marketing and sales management and a deep understanding and expertise in the area of supply chain. And Teresa is going to be kind of reviewing the current supply chain model in the food space. And we're going to follow up with her presentation with the other panelists. And then from there, we're just going to have a good time and have some conversations. So on that note, welcome, Teresa, and we're grateful to have you and excited for you to kind of give us the overall landscape.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's really great to be here and great to talk to all of you virtually. Really to kick things off, I really have to set the stage. And to do that, I have to take you back 7 months when the food world was really turned on its head. Dine-in restaurants were closed. There was panic buying across the nation, toilet paper shortages, empty grocery shelves, meat shortages, and workers across our nation either furloughed or moved to a remote work environment. It was really an anxious time for all of our customers and industry professionals. And at the end of the day, our goal was to provide an essential service in a safe environment. Today, I really want to walk you through what we saw in the food industry during this time and how the swift changes in the market impacted our food supply chain and how we're approaching the future. So on the first slide that you'll see up there, you can see that early on in the pandemic, we saw a sharp change in shopper behavior trends, including a major shift in the trip frequency reduction, and also saw an increase in the size of those baskets at retail locations. This rapid change in behavior was due to consumer demand shift in their purchase location. Consumers historically spent almost 50% of their food budget outside of the home in restaurants or on-the-go options, and that switched almost overnight to eating at home 100%. That fundamentally changed what we saw in our increased demand in that consumer packaged good products. Cooking from scratch items and that stock up behavior really started to increase. As the months have passed, we have seen many customers have fallen into a more stable shopping behavior. And as you can see on the slide, almost 57% of those surveyed in a recent poll by the Advantage Sales and Marketing team have indicated that they continue to plan more cooking from home occasions in the coming months. The outlook continues to show that customers will be maintaining these behaviors for their foreseeable future. It's also important to know that there will be constant change as new challenges present themselves. The continued economic pressure from those that are impacted by job loss reinforce the need for them to want to save money in uncertain times. It's also made an impact on the types of items that the customers are purchasing. Changes in the normal life events are now taking on new looks. Think about virtual return to school. What does holiday entertaining look like? How are those gathering sizes going to continue to influence this food supply? We've also seen a fascinating shift in the speed of customer adoption on online grocery purchasing, and it's really created a new avenue for customers to meet their food needs. So to really understand that customer shift, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about how that consumer demand shift really impacted the supply chain. As you look at the supply chain, on the next slide, you'll see that it's really important to understand that the change has been different over time. From March to June, we saw heavy impact based on those demand and consumer shift changes. Starting in July, the impacts for the supply chain really started to shift and was more around production capabilities, supply interruptions, really had a larger influence in the overall supply chain impacts. Let's start with consumer demand. Now, we talked about how influential the consumer demand shift was to the overall supply. Supply was not ready for the rapid change early on, but they've adapted and evolved, and they're starting to anticipate the demand change, and really it's improving the supply chain stability now. Production capacity was one of the key influences in the supply chain health. Manufacturers, such as Mark, really struggled to keep up with those consumer demand changes for retail-ready packages. Just so you know, it varies by manufacturer, but a large number of major manufacturers supply almost 50% of their products to restaurant and food service establishment. When that demand diminished to almost zero, manufacturers really had to shift to alternate outlets for their food and address the size and the varieties. But manufacturers were also impacted with staffing needs, and they had to provide a safe and socially distanced work environment, and that also impacted the total amount of production capacity that they could produce. Raw materials were another huge hurdle in the supply chain. As consumers stocked up at historic rates, the actual raw materials started to diminish. For example, last year, each year canned tomatoes are produced. They're packaged once a year in late summer. Last year's crop was produced based on historic demand. Consumer demand spiked this last March, consuming all of the available product in the market, and it really caused a scarcity of canned tomatoes for the whole summer. We're getting back into tomatoes, but it was a rough time. Transportation was also a huge hurdle for us. The demand for packaged products occurred at the same time across the entire nation, putting a stress on our transportation system. Warehouses and distribution centers struggled with capacity, both on the intake and the export, and that distribution network didn't meet the demand of the customers at the end user. Warehouse facilities also had to keep in mind for social distancing, and facilities had to look at their overall output and take that into consideration. The last one I like to call the invisible impact, which was packaging. This consumer shift in demand to packaged goods put a stress on the physical inventory of raw materials used to make packaging. An example of something that's impacting us today is aluminum. That raw material is used for canned soda, beer, even aluminum foil, and it's running in short supply. With the increased demand of packaged items, suppliers are running into shortages on the packaging and thus not able to produce the product for the customer. So as you can see, there's no one answer to what's happening in the food supply chain. It's an evolving situation. Manufacturers, retailers, and producers are working together to improve it. And as we've moved through the supply issues, retailers and manufacturers are innovating to find better ways to improve the supply chain for the long run. They're reviewing things like product assortment, optimizing their assortment to make sure they have focused on the best of the best items. They're looking at retail-ready packaging adoptions, new and different ways to deliver the same product to the customer based on what's available. They're also working closely to understand what the customer needs and shifts will become. So we have to adopt and anticipate those demand changes. And they're continuing to review alternative suppliers to offer and to meet those customers' ever-changing needs. It really is an exciting time to be in the food industry, but it's not for the faint of heart. We have to be resilient, we have to be innovative, and we have to be adaptive. I hope today provided you a little bit of insight on what's happening in the supply chain. Again, it's not one answer, but we continue to move forward to provide what we need in the food service industry. Thank you so much. And Mark, I can't wait to start this conversation.
Great. Thank you, Teresa. I really appreciate it. You know, as you were speaking, I was thinking about Albertsons, and during all of this, you were also in the middle of launching an IPO. So in the middle of an IPO, in the middle of a pandemic, a recession, you know, this period of civil unrest, you guys were having to try to think through what, 25, how many total stores?
Over 2,300 stores across the nation.
Over 2,300 stores of how to deal with just that not only that overall supply chain, but how to localize each one of those kind of areas. And I remember a discussion that we had as it related to how you brought in some of your local partners. One of them was Gaston's Bakery. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? Because I think it would be important, mostly for young budding entrepreneurs to kind of hear how you went about trying to figure out that supply chain, and how you looked at some of those local companies as an asset that could really, fill those shelves for you.
Yeah, Mark, that's a great example. So early on in the pandemic, we quickly realized that people were deciding they wanted to bake again, and they were no longer gluten-free. They were back on the gluten, and so flour, baking, sugar, yeast was essentially hard to find, unavailable in the marketplace. We turned to the relationships that we have with some of our local suppliers to help us meet those customer needs. So our, at the time, bakery sales manager had a great relationship with Gaston's. They had a wonderful conversation that, hey, I've got a mill. I'm able to package and supply you flour. Is that something you would be interested in? And immediately our answer was yes. We wanted to find a way to meet the customer's need because they were telling us they wanted flour, and we wanted to be able to provide that for them. So we partnered with them for weekly deliveries really early on, and was able to get those on the shelves and provide them for our customers. And it's actually something that now we're going to be continuing to carry even after the pandemic goes on. And even now that the flour supply has returned to normal, we feel like those local partnerships are really important, and we wanted to thank them and support them throughout the year.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for that. I know that was a big deal for Gaston's as a local company, so appreciate everything Albertsons did. All right, well, next I'm going to introduce Jenny Nelson. Jenny is with Dairy West as the Senior VP of Innovation Partnerships, where she works to represent dairy farm families in Idaho and Utah and promote the dairy industry and products locally, nationally, and globally. So welcome, Jenny.
Mark, thank you for having me. I find this to be a huge compliment to be on a panel of such esteemed colleagues. So really appreciate the opportunity. And as you guys talk about, you said the word over and over, being resilient. Well, I do have to say that the dairy industry really has taken this as an opportunity these last 7-8 months to really kind of pivot and change kind of the food supply in the dairy industry to, one, not only be resilient, but be adaptable and also save some of that milk that would potentially be discarded. There was a surplus of it that was typically going into the food supply chain for food service, so more wholesale type products versus retail. So being able to convert some of that product, the bulk product, into consumer friendly formats was really paramount for us to be able to make that really quick transition. So typically our processors have a bias potentially, or they're, competitors in the marketplace for, various reasons. They all came to the table and really, put biases aside and really worked collectively to really redirect some of that milk flow. So one, it wasn't put onto the ground, and two, it could go back to feed our local communities, which is really critical for our dairy farmers, making sure that they're giving back to their local communities, supporting our local food banks and our local food pantries, and really feeding those food insecure. So it was really an empowering moment to be a part of a program we initiated called Curds and Kindness that was fully funded by dairy farmers across Idaho and Utah. We had a lot of different allied industry partners come to the table. We also did a food truck to disseminate dairy products across, across the entire region, working with a lot of our different processor partners, Chobani being one of those, getting yogurt to some of those frontline responders, taking grilled cheese sandwiches, just as a way for us to say thank you for really putting yourself on the line day in and day out. So it was a great way for our farmers to kind of give back to our local communities. So that was just a good example of the way the dairy industry was really showcasing that ability to be resilient.
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate it, Jenny. You mentioned one thing about this kind of putting bias aside. And I think as we look through the food industry and really mostly as we look through food insecurities, what I saw was a tremendous amount of partnership and really what I would say is like radical collaboration, and all for that purpose of how do we make sure that food doesn't go to waste, but it lands on the tables of those that need it. So I think that's such a huge thing that we found during this time was this ability and this sense of really commitment to not only what we wanted to see happen as companies, but this larger landscape of how do we actually roll up our sleeves together and get the job done. So thank you so much for everything that you guys have done. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, next we have Mark Broadhurst, who's the Vice President of Public Affairs for Chobani. And Mark, I want maybe for you to talk a little bit about the dairy industry and as Chobani, and but also this program that you did around curds and kindness. And one thing I want to say, Mark, is I've been a big fan of Chobani. When I think of kind of those two sides of the coins that I talked about. One is let's make great products, but on the other side of the coin, let's really have a mission to do good. I appreciate that Chobani really helped really redefine, I would say, corporate social responsibility. So instead of it being an afterthought, right, like where we mitigate risk, that we really looked at it, you guys really looked at it as something that was very much woven in the DNA of who you are. And I think that's, we really something to applaud. Hamdi has done an incredible job with you and Peter and the whole Chobani team that really wanted to make a real difference, offering incredible, great food, but knowing that just as important, you wanted to make sure that you did a difference in the world. So I'd love to hear about how Chobani, did all of that.
Well, Mark, thank you. And really, really proud to be here with experts and people who, Jenny, my goodness, the work that you did. Mark, your opening on Happy Day, you took all the words right out of my mouth. You are clearly singing from the same hymnal, that's for sure. It is really it's a privilege, and I tell people that I have the best job because I work for a company that truly does care. I mean, we do make great food, but just as important as making that great food is taking care of others. And a couple of things that you said there, Mark. We don't even have corporate social responsibility, and that's because of something else you said. It is in the fabric of who we are. It is in our DNA. From the very beginning, Hamdi's mantra was put people at the center and build around it. And that's what we've done. And we talk about better food for more people. In a pandemic, boy, if you say that, you better mean it. And as you probably are familiar with Hamdi's point of view, he also deeply believes that business, especially businesses in the food industry, have a huge responsibility, have an obligation. And I love the subject matter in the conversation because I just think there are so many learnings, and you can kind of put it into a little compartment to say, oh well, how do companies and how do organizations behave in a pandemic? Okay, fine, you can do that, and there are great examples of good and bad, but it's really more than that, because I think one of the things that happened throughout this is consumers also changed the way Teresa, as you indicated, the way they shop, the way they think. And the world is pretty crazy right now as well, right? Like we all know that we're still in the middle of a pandemic. We won't even open the subject of politics, but it's a pretty crazy world. But despite the craziness, there is humanity around every corner, and there are these incredible partnerships, and there is this huge opportunity for entrepreneurs, for businesses that want to innovate, who are resilient, who are ready to pivot. And I think, there's already been some great examples discussed here today, and I'm sure there will be more, with courage and kindness. That what an awesome concept. And as you mentioned the tomato example, I was wishing dairy had the same problem, but dairy does not have that problem, right? And Jenny mentioned that in the beginning. We saw dumping, which as a dairy processor, we can't stand, but there's only so much that we can do. One of the pivots that we did pretty quickly, and Jenny, you also referenced it, is, just like every food company and every farmer, food service collapsed overnight. Food service is a good portion of our business. People don't normally think about it. They think about the Chobani you can buy at Albertsons, but airlines, hotels, schools, other institutions, there's a lot of Chobani all across the country. And that stopped almost immediately. So what we could have done is we could have shut down that side of our business. But we didn't do that. And what we did, similar, Mark, to as you described, your giving, and I'm a fan as well, and I love to watch all that you're doing. We're so aligned on the issue of hunger in this country, especially as it relates to children. Right? It's it's a horrible statistic before the pandemic. It's even worse now, and we've still got a long way to go. But instead of turning off our food service business, what we did is we kept the milk flowing. We continued to make yogurt, and we partnered with Feeding America and others like Dairy West. New York State had a program as well called Nourish New York. We've been involved in some of the USDA work, but we donated upwards of 7 million cups to food banks from coast to coast. So just about every day there was a truckload out of Twin Falls or upstate New York. And when I say a truckload of yogurt, that's about 125,000 cups of yogurt going to a food bank across the country. And we were there as well. So we did a number of the drive-throughs, and I think many of us probably did those, or else you saw the photos, you saw pictures on TV where thousands of people were lining up. Just incredible, just incredible. And so we shifted some of that business to taking care of New York City, which still needs a lot of help. But first responders, the elderly, absolutely hospitals, some of the work we did with Jenny, we're really proud of that. Another pivot for us, which was kind of interesting, was schools. So right before the pandemic hit, in fact, Hamdi was scheduled to go to Washington. We were going to do some advocacy on the subject of school lunch shaming.
I remember that. Yeah.
Child nutrition. Yeah.
Yeah.
And everything shut down. And so, it's like, okay, what are we going to do? Well, New Rochelle, New York became one of the first containment zones on the East Coast. And almost overnight, we also discovered that 3,500 kids in that school district who get free and reduced school meals would not have a meal, right? And pretty quickly, this became an issue all over the country, right? And what's interesting, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about it in this conversation as well, is that schools are still a challenge, and how do you feed kids in a pandemic, right? So lots of opportunity there. But that's just a taste of some of what we've been up to, and when we talk about pivoting and resiliency, it's just great to see that there are so many who are doing the same thing.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to having some more interaction with the as the panel kind of goes on. But the work that you guys have done has just been incredible. So appreciate it so much. All right. Well, next we have Kim Coeli, who's the Vice President of Marketing for Lamb Weston. She has years of experience in marketing and branding of large production companies, and just a tremendous amount of skills as it pertains to supply chain. So Kim, welcome, and we're excited to have you.
Thanks, great, thank you. I think probably a little different versus the other participants. Our company is, well, actually very probably similar to Chobani, but the Lamb Weston company is very much, the mix moves towards the food service side, the restaurant side of the equation. And so we had to deal with not only the retail surge, but also the dramatic decline in food service and how we, went about trying to address those opportunities, mostly helping our restaurant partners who were just, their whole livelihoods depended on it. Really interesting fact about the restaurant industry, 90% of the restaurant industry is either family owned or small business, less than 50 employees. So you can imagine, and it's the second largest employer in the United States. So that industry, sort of like the airlines, right, just collapsed overnight.
Yeah.
And so we put a tremendous amount of effort into helping those restaurants navigate the early days of COVID, and behavioral changes. So.
Well, wonderful. Yeah, well, appreciate it very much. And anything else that you guys, as you had to think through any adapting or innovating, anything else you want to share?
Well, I would just add to a little bit of what we experienced at Lamb Weston was some early day shifts from the pandemic, right? So like we kind of talk about in the first 45 days and then what's going to be ongoing. And so, there was a lot of emergency behaviors that had to happen. So like on restaurants, a lot of them didn't even have their menus online. But now as time has gone on and we're going to be going into the winter months, restaurants have slimmed down their menus. They're figuring about how do they put outdoor heating spaces together to keep the momentum. On the retail side, Teresa talked about, in the early days, it was just about getting anything to a customer that needed it because every SKU in the grocery store was out. But now it's about, okay, what's the most important things we need to have? There was a story in Harvard Business that talked about, do we really need 150 SKUs of toilet paper now? Let's get down to like the essentials, the 80-20 rule. I think for the entrepreneurs in the audience, I think there was some emergency things that happened, but then there's some sustaining behaviors and keeping their eyes on what they see from a sustaining behavioral perspective is really interesting. Shifts like online ordering, virtual connectivity like Zoom, creating backgrounds. There's lots of opportunities popping up all over the place that are even more sustained in nature.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think that was one of the kind of one of those areas for all of us was how to not only kind of keep those shelves filled, but with this whole packaging crunch that Teresa talked about, how are we able to get products packaged in a quick enough way that we could, actually get them to retail. And, I think about Albertsons and other grocery stores, normally having those schematics set just right for the right space, the right height, and all the different package sizes that Teresa and Albertsons had to deal with. So, thank you. I appreciate it, Kim. Well, I think on that note, let's just kind of open it up a little bit, in terms of what we've heard and, from all of you, and any thoughts on any of the presentations. Let's just kind of have some candid conversations.
So Mark, I'll give an example of a packaging distribution, issue. So at the retail level, a lot of the retailers across the region were posting limit signs on milk, gallons of milk, only buy one for family. And I think it almost created more of a pandemic among consumers, like a scare tactic. And unfortunately, that just was not the case. The milk was there. It was really just supply chain logistics that they had taken a hit. So we had to work with the retailers, across the region to try and combat that and really help, squash the consumer perception that, oh my gosh, there's no more milk. What are we going to do? How are we going to feed our children? So that was one area that we a hurdle that we had to overcome. But again, it was another opportunity for us to work closely with our retailers, making sure that supply chain, working with our distributors and our milk processors to make sure the product was getting there as quickly as possible, because it was not for lack of milk. I can promise you that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
That's a great point, Jenny. I think early on, there was a lot in the media that drove much of the panic buying that probably exacerbated the problem, right? Early on, you heard about, you saw pictures of empty shelves at the grocery store and you thought, man, if I see one, I better buy as much as I can. And so I think that did hurt early on. It really hurt us. And then as we got in a little bit further on, felt like we were getting better in supply. And then the whole meat shortage thing came rearing its ugly head again. And consumers were concerned about the total supply of meat. And, I think that there were times that panic continued, and it did drive behaviors that impacted everybody.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, the demand was incredible, and obviously put a strain on every part of the system, especially employees, which we all learned that we're an essential workforce, right? And what that means. But that was a little bit confusing in the beginning as well, and like many of you, thinking about how do we keep trucks rolling with all of these restrictions happening all over the place? How do we keep our team in stores? But really for us, things kind of boil down to first and foremost, how do you take care of your employees in a pandemic? Because without them, there's no meeting that demand, right? So that was really the first thing, and we implemented a number of safety protocols and extra benefits, which are still in place. After that, then you can move to, all right, how do you keep the plant running? And then how do you keep Chobani on the shelf at albertsons and supermarkets across the country? And lastly for us was, how do we take care of communities? Those, and until now, those are the four things that we continue to be very, very focused. So there's a lot of prioritization, and a lot of the noise for a lot of other things just kind of fell out of the way, right? Focus on what's most important.
Mark, I think you're right on. I think this has given the industry as a whole the time to reprioritize and the time to reflect on what is the most important thing. Our people are critical to our business, and we couldn't do it without them. And then the unseen people behind the scenes making the product, producing and distributing the products, they are the ones that put food on our tables. I think you're right in that it did give us a good opportunity to reflect on what's the most important thing. And I think even today, and I think long standing, that will be something that we continue to keep in the forefront.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with that. I really appreciate that, because I think, at the end of the day, it's people matter, right? So we can, we can produce product, we can get it to shelf, but this sense that as business owners and as corporations, that when it's all said and done, people matter, and we have to really reflect on what's happened, I think, this last 6 months, and then how do we take that, as you said, Teresa, and not only adopt it in a way that can be sustainable, but that moves forward and really becomes something that I think kind of changes the landscape around kind of corporate America, that people matter and that we couldn't do this without anybody. I always tell young entrepreneurs that any success we have ever had has been on the shoulders of somebody else. And it's been because people have opened the doors, and I think it's around those relationships, around that collaboration and that respect and that sense of dignity, that whether a person is working on the line at the checkout stand, whether they're driving a truck, everybody matters, and everybody has a right. What I like to say is sit at the table, and everybody has something meaningful to give. And there's a respect and a dignity about that. Mark, as you said, around our shared humanity. And I think that's one word. Our shared humanity has really risen. And we've just seen in the middle of darkness such wonderful pieces of light.
I think one area that I'll touch on, and maybe it's a great ending note for me, is to talk about, being resilient, one of the ways that we anticipate doing that in the dairy industry is by creating a food innovation center. So for those entrepreneurs that might be listening in, how critical and how important is it to really focus on the people, Mark, to your point, and really help them that are maybe they've got a wonderful idea that maybe it's just on a scratch pad or
right,
and really help them take that idea all the way from concept all the way through. I'm talking legal work, marketing, packaging, messaging, and of course, food science and all of that fun stuff, all the way through to commercialization. So working with partners like, Teresa at Albertsons to really help get some of these new innovative products on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited to say that we're working with several different community partners on erecting a potential food innovation center, and would love to work more closely with our friends at Trailhead and the wonderful work that they're doing with networking and relationship building. I think there's a lot to be had for that. So just a fun, exciting announcement in the dairy world.
I love that. That's a great gift to the community. It's hard enough to be a young startup and an entrepreneur, let alone having to face all the difficulties that are before us. And I think one of the things that is critical that we've learned through this is that we need each other. And so I think what a huge opportunity for young entrepreneurs to be able to take part in a food incubator like that. And I know Chobani, you guys have just done an incredible job around that. And I think that's what I see and I love the most is this willingness to open up doors for people. So so thank you for that. I appreciate it. Anything else?
Well, I was just going to add to what Jenny was saying, which is, right now is when innovation is exploding, right? I mean, everybody has experienced this massive shift, and you can start to listen to your friends, look for a couple of different data points, and look for what are workarounds that people are trying to deal with or problems that they have. And look for those like silver linings. So we talk about it every week, and we're trying to understand, how are both restaurants and consumers shifting how they navigate. So one of the big shifts that happened was work from home. So when people went to the office, that really fueled breakfast and lunch at restaurants. With the shift from everybody now working at home, and schools are in different phases of life, right? Some people are still homeschooling and some are hybrids, but we're trying to reposition our products for breakfast solutions, lunch solutions, how to help parents navigate meal times with food offerings. And so, what are the struggles that consumers are having right now with getting groceries delivered? Or I remember early on in the pandemic, people couldn't even get Albertsons, pick up or deliver because like all the slots were filled. It was crazy, right? So it's such an exciting time to keep your ear to the ground. I always talk about the last sort of recession, right? 09, 10, and 11. Back in the day, right, almost 10, 11 years ago, restaurant chains like Chipotle and Panera, we call them fast casual, right? Restaurants that like Cafe Rio or Costa Vida, those types of restaurants, we call them fast casual, honestly barely existed. There was a handful, but that last recession brought out a whole new innovation space. Consumers didn't necessarily want to go to TGI Fridays and Chili's and full service restaurants and sit there for hours. They wanted high quality food at a low price that they could highly customize. So it was like a really upscale Subway. That exploded in 9-10 to the point now where it's its own restaurant segment, and we see it, just growing leaps and bounds here in Boise, right? Every day there's a new fast casual restaurant popping up. So there is absolutely going to be incredible innovation happening right now. And I think it's about keeping your ear to the ground, seeing those problems and addressing them. I think Gaston's at Albertsons is a great example of who would have thought, right? But you did it.
Right.
Hopefully there'll be more of those.
Yeah. Kim, I think you're spot on. Finding a solution to what customers need and consumers need is really that part of innovation,
Yeah.
and making sure that you're close to that longer term. I think we talked about short term, long-term changes. So keeping in mind the trends and making sure that they are sustainable trends is also important. Young entrepreneurs investing their whole life and putting their whole everything into this is
Right.
the understanding of those long-term trends and making sure that they're really spot on there and they're really willing to take that risk. But if you take the risk, it can be very rewarding.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, very powerful. One of the things that that I know our team really started to do, and we talked to a lot of young entrepreneurs and startups, was, data is crucial, right? But there's this other piece that I think is just as important, and that is actually getting ourselves back into the stores, so back into the retail store. So I want to really encourage young entrepreneurs that some of the best information you can gain is right there at the store by talking to customers. I remember watching one young startup who was a local company here who was putting product on the shelf. And as people were passing by, she was asking questions, like, why did you pick that product?
Yes.
And why did you pick that over this product? And I think, sometimes we get caught with big data, and but I love this aspect of actually being boots on the ground, listening to the customers and asking the questions.
Yeah.
There's so much innovation all over, and really, like we've all been saying, I mean, if you can make the adjustment, if you can take the risk during a pandemic, the future probably bodes well for you, right?
Right.
And one other area where we saw some really cool innovation was in the nonprofit world. So we talked a lot about in the beginning how all of us focused on giving back and supporting food banks, et cetera. We partnered with all kinds of new small nonprofits who cropped up. Some of them were college kids and
Right.
others who were using the power of technology to figure out logistics and how to get huge amounts of food delivered and distributed through, like New York City and elsewhere across the country. And I thought that was really remarkable as well. So it's a touch of humanity, but it's also, I mean, they were startups and some of them have
Right.
moved on and they're doing bigger and better things now. But that was really awesome to see as well. And I hope that continues.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, everybody. We really just appreciate everybody taking the time to be here, and what a great conversation. And I wish we could keep going for another hour and talk through some of the other pinch points that I know that we all experience. But one thing I do know is as each one of you said, that this is really an incredible time to be in this industry. And so for all those entrepreneurs out there, I like this ear to the ground, and so keep your ear to the ground. Surround yourself with smart and wise people. Ask questions, and don't be afraid to take some risks in the midst of all of this. And so thank you, everybody, for being here, and for those that are going to be in the audience. If you have any questions, please feel free to message them over, and we'll see how we can answer those. And on that note, thanks again, and we appreciate everybody's time, and have a wonderful day, and thanks for all that you do.